Andriy will talk about Chernobyl KGB documents that have been recently declassified. By the way, Ukrainian SBU archive is one of the most open ones. Thank you. Speaking of what people call KGB archives, you see, most people think it's all about repressions and terrors of the 30s and so on. But if you look at the archives through the eyes of Chernobyl disaster, we will see unexpected conclusions and some interesting points that help us work with many topics, in addition to repressive policy of the Soviet Union, which includes disinformation, all kinds of activities and operations carried out by KGB. As far as the way we could use these documents, you see, what is kept here, it's quite unique because the Ukrainian legislation with respect to access to former KGB archives is probably the most liberal in the world. Until recently, it was the Czech legislation. So now the Czechs are envious with us. Now, what Ukraine, how Ukraine is different compared to, for instance, Belarus. In Belarus, they still have KGB. We don't. By the way, after your presentation, we will have Franek Vechorka, senior advisor to Ms. Tikhanovska. So please stay tuned. Speaking of Baltic countries, what Ukraine, or how Ukraine differs from their countries, KGB documents have not been taken away from Ukraine. But now I'd like to tell you a bit more about the documents concerning Chernobyl accident from the point when it was built and all the way to the accident. What makes these documents unique? Well, the fall of the Berlin Wall and democratic protests in the east of Germany, when they seized Stasi building, they seized not only the archive, but also rooms and the documentation. Basically, it's a special intelligence service which was created by KGB and was pretty much run from Moscow. After changes in the Soviet Union, we saw attempts to cover up what was secret and also try to take away the archives from the countries that could become independent. That's why the archives from the Baltic states were taken away, but Ukrainian archives stayed because in Crimea they doubted that Ukraine will actually become fully independent. And in fact, the reason why we are now in the state of war with Russia is because Moscow is trying to prevent us from becoming fully independent. So the documents stayed. But speaking of the documents that concern Chernobyl and PP, these are the documents covering the period of 70s and 80s. Now let's look at the slide. This is one of the orders, KGB orders, which was published in 1970, concerning the storage of archival documents. Now, what's interesting is that it mostly deals with the work of agents, but this order basically made it legal to cleanse the archives, and the closer to the modern days we approach, the less documents have been left. How did they cleanse it? Well, they were reviewing the cases, and when they would review a case and they would say it's no longer relevant, we can just destroy it. And that's how invaluable documents would simply be destroyed. So basically covering up the tracks, yes? Yes. But you see, Chernobyl in the 90s was still in the spotlight of attention. And this has led to a large volume of documents related to Chernobyl was not destroyed. And we still have those documents available. So when Chernobyl NPP was built, basically simultaneously with regional KGB office opened cases which would oversee the construction process of the plant, and then they would oversee the operations, and then of course they would oversee the after effects and the cleanup operations and move evacuation of people and so on. So all of these documents were kept, they were never destroyed, and currently we have up to 10,000 of documents describing everything in detail, starting from construction, operation, pros and cons. Mostly it's internal KGB documentation, including reports, all kinds of agents involved, memos that would be sent to Moscow and back. And of course, because this was a regional KGB office, there was a fairly active exchange between Moscow and Kiev, covering a wide range of issues. We tried to look at a large team of researchers, and it's also a team of historians from the Academy of Sciences and so on. And they published this book, KGB Chernobyl Dossier of files. And so we decided that we should represent these documents to a wide audience.
We have prepared the online presentation, online collection of documents, and it is leading by a number of viewers we were able to attract, but also it is incentivizing researchers and further studies and attracts the interest of academia. So we concluded that it would be a good idea to prepare 2 volumes, 2 publications, 2 books. One book is telling what has been happening since the construction has been started to the nuclear accident, and the second volume would be dedicated to the events unfolding since the accident until nowadays. And we will show you a brief video and try to highlight the topics that might represent the greatest interest for media, for academia, for researchers, and for wider groups of public. Actually, this these two books may be interesting for you to read as a documentary and as a novel. I would like to add, indeed, that these two books are really interesting. While preparing for this conference, I was going to review a couple of materials, but once I started reading these two books, I couldn't stop before 4 a.m. in the morning because these documents are so relevant to us Ukrainians living to the side of the major world nuclear accident. We can imagine how many facts have been silenced and how much the information was distorted in line with the then policies and the politicians trying to serve their interests. I like the slogan dedicated to the victims, to memory of the victims of the World War II, never again. I wish we could adopt the same sort of slogan to Chernobyl accident. Okay, let's review the documents included in the book. The first part of this publication, the first book is the summary of events unfolding from the commencement of construction until the nuclear power plant accident. Problems with construction, drawbacks in construction materials, and a lot of documents have shown that the construction works were poorly performed, and the information that was collected due to agents who were present among those teams who were involved in the construction of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant site. Although the problems may seem minor if you look at them, but cumulatively, taken all together, they could have produced such a major failure, and actually there have been warnings issued that such a failure might occur, and the nuclear power plant accident, this slide is dedicated to it, but I would like to sum up that the accident that took place in 1986 was not the first ever accident that happened in nuclear power plants in the former Soviet Union. What made this accident famous is that it became, actually, this is the first accident that became widely known. However, we received other documents of KGB proving a list of a number of other accidents. The information on the nuclear power plant established in Chernobyl indicated that Chernobyl, as well as St. Petersburg nuclear power plant, had specific equipment that in case of failures might lead to major accidents. The information was restricted, and only investigating teams could get access to such information. There were evidences of prior accidents in Chernobyl too, leading to leakages of radiation. However, the scale of those accidents was minor, and it was possible to prevent the information from leaking onto the wider groups of public, and that's how it was kept secret, so that nobody found out about it in Ukraine. Okay, they could prevent the spread of information, but they could not stop the spread of radiation, and once foreign sources started reporting on the extremely big increase or hike in radiation emission, Ukrainian or former Soviet media started publishing that information as well. The first messages that appeared early in the morning on the accident that they are shown on this slide. What impressed me in terms of the information presented as of morning on the 26th of April, Bruhanov had written that one person became victim of this accident, but this person is unknown, remains unknown. But how can it be possible? Nuclear energy is such a high-profile industry, and with so many layers of security, anybody who can get to the nuclear power plant undergoes security checkups. How can you not know the name of the person who fell victim of the power plant accident? Russian propaganda and information that is being spread around, like portraying it like the act committed by foreign sources. Basically, it's ridiculous that it's unknown who actually fell victim of the nuclear power plant. Basically, Russian propaganda thrives on such presentation of facts, one-sided presentation of facts. Once the accident took place, KGB representatives rushed to the site, and they prepared several versions what might have happened. And one of the versions that it is a hostile action taken by foreign enemies, this version was discarded immediately. In general, this book may make you think deeper about the essence of this nuclear power plant accident. While reading this book, you may find the answer for yourself. What this book has shown, it has shown that both political party elites, Communist Party elites, and KGB try to keep the illusion of normality in the territory of Ukraine. Once the accident happened, immediately tourists staying in the territory of Ukraine and former Soviet Union were informed of that, and they were trying to escape, trying to flee the Kiev, Ukraine, Soviet Ukraine, whereas the actions of the KGB agents were aimed at making sure all seems to be normal, sense of normality is brought back, not only among Kiev city residents, but among residents of Ukraine. And in this case, we can recall the notoriously known May 1st Labor Day demonstration and manifestation, in spite of the fact that the ruling elite of the Communist Party, ruling elites were informed about the accident, and Kiev city residents were informed that the political elites were already deporting their children outside of Kiev. We have the documents included in this book about the children's costumes, children's outfits the children used while participating in the parade dedicated to May 1st Labor Day manifestation. They had to be destroyed because of excessive radiation. Normally, they would have to be returned to the storage, but they had to be destroyed, and such facts, such events are clearly illustrating what had been happening in spring 1986, and that is related to both people participating in the liquidation of the accident as well as ordinary citizens. Very few people got to realize, people working in the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl, they were unaware of the level of risks and the threats arising out of such high radiation levels. And in addition to it, there was a problem of lack of equipment that could measure such high radiation levels. And evacuation, the issue of evacuation. Also, the population evacuation started, and some people complained of the radiation of radiation sickness. However, when addressing the hospitals, they were diagnosed with cardiovascular disorders and were provided with treatment for that. If we ask the question, how many people actually fell victims of the nuclear power plant accident, we can calculate the number of employees of the nuclear power plant and the number of patients, but this question remains unanswered. This book presents an attempt to pose a number of questions, trying to identify those who were guilty, who are to blame for it. A lot of journalists then tried to come to Ukraine, come to Kiev, in order to understand what was actually happening. Many of them attempted to visit Chernobyl, trying to take samples of the soil or sample of anything they could get, trying to establish the degree of radioactive contamination. Some of the KGB agents managed to swap or to replace the soil samples collected by one French journalist who was working in the newspaper funded by the Soviet Union. Actually, this is a brilliant illustration. Journalists could not imagine such things could be happening, but life provides us sometimes with more vivid, more brilliant illustrations, cases of such absurd things that were happening. This slide is dedicated to the response from the population or reaction of the population on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident. And this is a segue to the second book in this publication, the reaction of the population. It sounds like a cliche. There was no opinion polling. However, through the KGB agents, through the postal correspondence, KGB collected and gathered information on the reaction of the population. Although that information may not be considered reliable and representative in the sense of the present-day opinion polling, however, to a certain degree, it allows us to be able to judge what the population of Ukraine thought of this accident. One nuance picked up by KGB agents is that Ukrainians were comparing that the accident that took place in Chernobyl, comparing that to the famine genocide attempted by Soviet Union leadership back in 1932, 1933. If you watch the documentary series HBO, you could see some relevance of this thought, but opinions that were spreading around among Kyiv city residents at that time were indicative of drawing a parallel between the famine in 1932, 1933 and Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident. Svetlana and Valery Parshunov once organized a major exhibition dedicated to 33rd anniversary of Chernobyl catastrophe, whereas representatives of many countries, journalists, media, and members of the public tried to review and address the issue, what actually Chernobyl accident was. I remember the piece of the Spanish artist. He tried to summarize what he knows about Ukraine, and he created an art object with a pile of wheat flour. Spanish artist knew that back in 1932, 1933, Ukrainians were deprived of bread, deprived of wheat flour, and he compared that with smoke or ashes from Chernobyl accident, which is also white, the same color. He tried to bring parallel and establish connection between these two historical events. If we look at this set of documents related to the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl, this publication represents a summary of the most documents that we could find documents that are available. They serve the important source of information about city of Kiev, city of Pripyat. And then if we talk about the second book in this publication, I would like to stress such concepts as classified information, confidential information. There are some documents which were published. They were related to classified information and relevant treatment of the information. If you read this document, you will be able to understand what that means. You will be able to analyze what was allowed to be spread around as regards Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident and what was not. Actually, my conclusion is that basically nothing was allowed to be circulated in terms of information. All information was classified, essentially. There is a document pertaining to instructions how to work with media, and interesting to look at what international foreign media wrote about this accident, and domestic media for researchers working in the field of journalism history. This may be amusing. If I am not mistaken, this book contains documents depicting how foreign journalists were brought to Kiev and presented with some fake facts that we have no radiation emission, and look at our meters, radiation meters, look at the readings of various pieces of equipment. There is no radiation. Also, there was an attempt to organize it in a way as if ordinary citizens talk to journalists, so that journalists, international journalists, do not have an impression that they are talking to officials in Ukraine. They wanted to collect evidences and testimony of ordinary citizens, so that they could share the message across, but in fact they did not have contact with ordinary citizens. It was rather staged.
And it was all about information wars of KGB. And we can see what FSB is doing. It's sort of like it was handed down from generation to generation, so to speak. Now, the next point that is important: what was allowed to say? And that was the official position, which was published in the book, and these documents were circulated to everyone so that everyone was aware of the official version, what was allowed to say. And for instance, the reason for the accident was simply a human factor, human error, not the technology. And in conclusion of the book, they are covering the court, and not as such, but how the population perceived the court and how they believed and trusted the courts. I can see that practically it shows that for collective irresponsibility, specific people had to carry responsibility. Well, that was the system at the time, you see. So this is everything I wanted to say about our two books. It covers a lot of documents. The books are available online. The only thing I wanted to explain is that these two books represent the view of KGB around everything that concerned Chernobyl. And the documents were prepared by KGB officers, and they might trigger some actually affinity to the officers of KGB, because you would get an impression that they were bright, well educated, and this hopefully will help you to figure out yourself how one could perceive everything that preceded the accident and its after effects. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to ask one question. How many documents concerning Chernobyl are available in KGB archives in Russia? And do you think there are something interesting there? And is there any likelihood they could be destroyed? No, I hope they won't be destroyed, because as an archivist, I hope this will not happen. But do they have documents there? Of course, yes, because after the accident, several commissions were formed, and both at regional and national level. And so those commissions would have generated quite a lot of documents. There are also court cases, court files there for individuals who were convicted. And the overwhelming majority of documents were created in several copies. And of course, the original copy would be sent to Moscow. So they do have a lot. However, what we have shows that most of the documents concerning Chernobyl, it is available in Ukraine. And so we encourage everyone to get familiar with these documents and work with them. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is limited, and we have to wrap up our conversation. I recommend that you read these books if you want to learn about this accident straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, relying on documents and not on hearsay. Thank you, Andriy.